Hi, my name is Rebecca Hastings, and I'm the current National Secretary of PTE. Click the links on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and join our LinkedIn group. We share information about upcoming events, scholarships, and research opportunities, as well as national updates. Also, make sure you check out our website at aotf.org for forms and detailed information about awards and scholarships.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm Martise. I am the Pi Theta Epsilon National Treasurer, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the awards and scholarships that we do offer through Pi Theta Epsilon. There are a couple of really good opportunities for anyone who is a member, which is a nice benefit. One of the first awards that we do give out is the President's Award, and this is awarded to chapters as a whole. It honors and recognizes chapters who organize and implement outstanding scholarly activities that are developed to increase knowledge, develop professional skills, and contribute to the advancement of the OT profession. We just ask for a written description of the activity or function, a relationship of the activity to the mission of PTE, the overall goal of your activity, and the outcomes. And you can find more specific details on how to submit this, like Rebecca said, at www.aotf.org under the Pi Theta Epsilon tab, and then under Membership and Documents. And this award is accepted on a rolling deadline each year by October 1st, so you can submit it at any point in time. Secondly, we award the Mary J. Bridle First Research Award, and this has a purpose to foster scholarship and first research efforts of OT students, young practitioners, and early researchers. This is an opportunity for Pi Theta Epsilon members to have a research manuscript reviewed by experts in our field and published in OTJR. And in addition, there is also a cash award of $750. This award is similar to the President's Award in that it's accepted annually on a rolling basis by October 1st of each year. The requirements for submission include a cover letter, your research manuscript, and a CV from each author. Once again, this can be found at the AOTF website under the Pi Theta Epsilon tab under Membership and Documents. And third, a unique scholarship that only Pi Theta Epsilon members are eligible for is the Martha Kirkland PTE Endowed Scholarship. This is awarded to PTE members who have demonstrated leadership potential and aspire to roles in education, practice, or research, awarded at amounts of $500. And in order to apply for this, you must meet all eligibility requirements that are stated on the website. It's on the page with all of the other AOTF scholarships that are awarded. So when you submit your application, if you're a PTE member, you're automatically eligible for this if you meet the other requirements. And included in those are 2 references as well as a program director's statement. And the submission date for this year is not yet posted, but you can find it at www.aotf.org under the Scholarships and Grants tab, under Scholarship Program, and then Eligibility and Scholarship Availability. One other unique opportunity that we do offer to PTE students is each year for the past 2 years, and then again this upcoming year, at our student conclave in November, PTE hosts a poster session. This is just a nice opportunity for students to be able to present their project or their research to their peers and get more practice with their public speaking. And last update that we'd like to share with you is upcoming in April, so less than a month away, as you may know, is the AOTA National Conference. And Pi Theta Epsilon has 2 events going on at the conference this year. First, Wednesday, April 6th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. is our Faculty Advisors Workshop. So any and all faculty advisors of the Pi Theta Epsilon chapters are welcome. This year we're going to talk a little bit about the PTE purpose, mission, and objectives, and more specifically go into awards, scholarships, forms of communication, the website, and student initiatives that we've been working on. So that way all that information can be brought back to chapters. Immediately following the workshop, we have the PTE Alumni Reception, where any and all past and present PTE members are welcome and encouraged to attend from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. on that Wednesday, April 6th. Wendy Koster, the AOTF chair, will be there and will be providing just a few brief PTE updates and some networking opportunities. We hope that you all now are a little bit more aware of these events and opportunities and that you will take advantage of them. We can't wait to connect with you at conference. And just a reminder that immediately following our updates is going to be a presentation on ways to be involved in producing and effectively using research as a clinician. So we hope that you'll stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Close enough? Okay. Thank you for letting me be here today. I'm delighted. I'm looking at the future of our profession, and to know you have an understanding of how important evidence and research is so essential. Basically, it's going to be transformative for our profession in the future. It's going to make us viable, and it's going to make us thrive. So I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited that you're allowing me to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about how to generate research as a clinician, and I should tell you that I've been a clinician for probably, 20-some years now, and I have been a researcher probably for about 15 years, and I cannot give up that clinical piece. I still to this day, I'm a full-time researcher at the moment, and I still to this day have to spend one day in the clinic each week so that I can stay connected to what the real needs are in our profession out there in the clinic. So I'm going to talk to you as a researcher, but also I understand what it's like to be in a clinical situation and how you can do research in that setting. So I'm going to focus on 3 key considerations when you're going to embark in clinical research. One is choosing a project or a subject population. Second is supervision and mentoring. And the third one is resources. And I'll speak to each of these specifically. These are probably 3 of the most important things to consider when you're thinking about doing a project. And when you're in the clinic, there's a unique perspective on this. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is to start small. Our natural inclination is to come in with this huge idea that you really want to make a difference, right, in the profession. You come in with these big projects. For example, I had a doctoral student come in and said, "Beth, would you be my mentor? I'm really excited about this project." And I said, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "I want to determine the effectiveness of SI interventions in OT." I said, "Well, I'm not going to marry you, so we might have to narrow that project down. I'm not willing to spend the next 10 years of my life mentoring you in this research, although it's very, very important research. I did want her to graduate." So you have to really focus your project. You have to really think about, okay, I want that's your research agenda. If that's what you want to do, determine the effectiveness of a broad intervention with a number of different populations, that's your lifetime research agenda. So you have to figure out what are the small components that I can do to get there, especially when you're in a clinical setting. We have a lot of demands on us when we're in the clinical setting. And the amount of time that you have is very limited to focus on researches. So you have to figure out, how can I make that happen in that setting? So one of the things I suggest is start small. It also gives you the experience you need to do some of the larger projects as well. Another suggestion I think can be really, really helpful in helping you get involved in research and eventually moving your own research forward is connecting with a project that's ongoing. There are a lot of researchers and there are a lot of people that would love to have your help and would be really interested in making that connection with you as a clinician and research. So one of the things I suggest is go on the local university website. Look at what the faculty members are doing. See if what you're interested in connects with what they're doing. And then reach out to them. And I will talk about this under mentorship and supervision, but how you can go about doing that. Something else that I suggest in everyday practice is using small ways to collect data. And this is important because it can translate into a research study at some point in time, but it also can help provide you with evidence that you need within that setting. And I'll give you an example of this that I experienced in practice. So I had a case where the insurance company was coming back to me and they said, I'm sorry, we're not going to fund you for the next 12 sessions. We don't believe that what you're doing has evidence to it. And so unfortunately, they were kind of messing with the wrong OT. because I knew how to handle this situation. And so I said, okay, how about this? How about if I provide the evidence for you? So I delved into the literature and I pulled out what I could on the effectiveness of the interventions that we were using. And that was the first step. So that sold them on giving me 6 sessions. Okay, so I got my 6 sessions and I said, okay, how am I going to prove to them that I am helping this person and they are making progress towards goals that are covered by insurance? So I use goal attainment scaling. Now, can I give an idea? How many of you have heard goal attainment scaling before? Is that familiar to some people? Okay, a handful of you. Okay, that's good. So goal attainment scaling is something I've used in effectiveness studies and research, as well as every day in the practice that I do with children. So every one of the children that I work with has a goal attainment scale. And a goal attainment scale, let me see if I can switch back and forth here. This isn't the greatest picture of it, but basically it is just a very measurable goal. It's a goal that you can measure, and you had different levels of treatment success where you modify the goal up or down. That's something we do every day in practice anyway. But this is a little bit more specific, and then you can actually assign numbers to it. And those numbers, you can have multiple goals, can then translate into a standard score. So if you compile some of this data, you can actually have a small research study eventually if you add a couple other outcomes. So that's something that can be done very simply. Along with this, I suggest single subject designs are a good way to start. When you're in clinical practice, that data is a little bit more easier to collect in that setting, so you can start with something like that. And the other thing you need to really think about when you're choosing a project, do you have the population and resources? When I say this, please realize that I believe you can overcome a lot of barriers. So when I'm saying this, that doesn't mean you can't pursue your line of research. It just means you might have to be creative, or you might have to create collaborations and networks to be able to do so. So if you're interested in doing some research with children with autism or adults with autism, and you only have 3 on your clinical caseload, that might pose as a challenge. You know, so you have to really think about, okay, what population will my study, do I want to target, and how do I have access to that? The other thing is, if you want to do a study, for example, and it's assistive technology, and you only have access to the technology for a certain amount of time, that could be problematic if you want to do a study. So you have to think about those resources, and we're going to talk specifically about resources in a few minutes. And the other thing, somebody said this earlier about with evidence-based practice, is ethics and IRB. So when you launch a study, I suggest to you that the first thing you figure out is what kind of ethics review I need to go through, either at the place I work or the local university or whoever I'm working with. Many times the place that you work will have some kind of ethics review board, whether it's a full IRB or just an ethics review board, they'll have something. And you want to go find out what you have to do to get approval for your study. And the best question for you to ask is, how long is that going to take? I've been in a situation where I've had the resources to run these really cool studies I was really excited about. I had students that were interested. They were going to volunteer their time. They were invested in this. I had some space and materials that I could use. And guess what happened? The IRB took 2.5 months, and the students graduated. And the space I had was then allotted someplace else, so I didn't have those resources. So that makes a big deal in terms of preparing. And sometimes you'll have to go through 2 reviews. I know these sound like barriers, but it can be done. And sometimes you have to go through your place of employment, and if you're a student, you might have to go to the university too. Okay. The other thing I highly suggest is connecting with a mentor or a researcher. This can be the best way to move clinical research forward. And if you remember nothing else, if you are falling asleep right now or thinking about what's going to happen later on today, this is the one thing that I want you to take away from today. The one thing, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to contact that person. I have had some of the best mentors in research in the profession that you could imagine. They have been pivotal in helping me move my research agenda forward, and I am so thankful for them. Most of the time, how I obtain those mentors in research is because I picked up the phone or I wrote an email and I asked. That's all it took. And with that, people welcome that. If they say, the worst thing that can happen is that they say no, right? That's okay. It might, and if they're saying no, it's not because of you, it's because of maybe their time demands are too crazy at that point in time, or maybe what you're interested in doesn't connect close enough to what they're doing. So don't be afraid to ask. You'll be amazed at how many doors open when you do that. With that, though, make sure that you can connect with the person you're asking. Connect with researchers that have similar interests to you. So go find out information about that person before you try to connect with them. You can come in and help them with a project. They might help you launch your own research agenda. And I am also going to tell you how to sell yourself too in a few minutes, because you have a lot to offer. Volunteer to help move projects forward. In our department right now, I have what they call an ASD lab. So it's an autism spectrum disorder lab, research lab right now. And I can't tell you how many incredible students and clinicians, volunteers have come through this lab. Fantastic people that have done great work. Now they connected with me, they're interested in the projects that are going on, and they help me with these projects. But out of this, there's a mutual beneficial relationship here. I'm helping them learn about research, get their first experience in research so they can launch their own agenda if they're interested in it. They also get references from me, and many of them actually have had their first publication with me. And that can be a really big deal if they're interested in research. So there's been a lot of benefits in both, for both sides of the situation. So volunteer for some of those. If you're going to volunteer for projects, I suggest this. Some of you might be in clinical practice already. Many of you are heading into your field works, or you're finishing up, or you're going to be finishing up in the next year. When you get into clinical practice, it's pretty demanding initially. It's very different, but it's also very exciting. So if you're going to volunteer for something, just make your expectations clear. So if you want to go and help with a research project, come in and talk with your mentor and say, hey, listen, I can give you 2 to 3 hours a week. That's my goal. So they know what to expect. And also ask them, what do you expect of them? If I could have your time for 2 hours a month, that would be great. And think about what's feasible. Here's the big one. I hope that you leave and understand your value as a clinician in the research process. Willingness to help with projects is something that we already talked about. Identify your strengths and how they can be helpful for a project. As I said, with my lab, some of the students come in with incredible strengths. I'm great at networking and helping with recruitment, and they are fantastic. It's wonderful in research. I'm really good at organizing, and they're great at organizing the data. So don't be afraid to sell yourself. You have these unique characteristics, and obviously you are some of the leaders in our profession, being connected with PyTheta, and you understand the value of research and evidence. Realize that you as a clinician also have a unique perspective. You can provide access to participants in research that a lot of researchers don't have, and you yourself, when you're starting a project, you also have that access. But the biggest thing is you have a perspective about what needs to be done, what research needs to be generated, what is important, what's happening in that clinical world that needs to have more evidence, that we need, what questions do we need to be asking? For many researchers, that connection to that clinical world isn't really clear. I think that we have a lot of great OT researchers, and many of them are connected. But there are many times that, we get a little bit out of touch sometimes, and we need to hear the voice of people who are there every day making a difference and seeing what needs to be done. So realize your value. Now, resources. So resources is something we all struggle with. When you go into the clinic, depending on where you are, you might be a resource-heavy place, you might not be, but you'll always find that you need something else. You need this evaluation tool. Oh, there's not enough time. That's the biggest thing. There's not enough time. So time is something that you need to consider. How can I make this work? I want to generate research. How can I make it work in everyday practice? One of the things I would suggest, if you can integrate it into your clinical routine, collecting data somehow in your clinical routine, that's one of the best ways to go about it. If you have some outcome measures that are part of your evaluation process, that enough could be some data that could be really helpful. We talked about access to populations already. Materials and staff. You might, when you're generating research, you might need certain things to generate the research. And you also might need certain staff. Do you need other clinicians in that environment to help you collect data? So these are some of the things that you should be thinking about. The other thing I highly suggest when you get out there and your clinicians, connect with your local universities. And the reason being is that there are, as you well know, how many of you have completed research projects of some sort in your program? How many have helped with some kind of project with a faculty member or somebody else? Okay, so a lot of you, it's required for most programs to have some connection, some experience in the research world. As a clinician, you want to get some of that research move forward. If you connect with your university, you may be able to have access to students that are working towards their OT degree that would be willing to help with some of those projects. They may be really interested in that. We have that happen quite a bit. I have clinicians contact me frequently where they're asking if, you know, hey, one, can you mentor me? And two, are there resources that would be interested in helping with this? And it really is a wonderful experience for everybody involved, for the students, for the clinicians, and for myself. It's a great way to move that research and generate new research. We did, and that has happened recently. I'm going to use this as an example. Maybe when you're a clinician, you'll know what this is. I don't know if you know what it is already. We had a doctoral student that developed the Size Matters handwriting program in our program. And so she did all the development of this. And then when she went out and she's using this in her practice and implementing it in her practice, people were coming back and saying, where's the evidence? Understandably so. Where's the evidence for this? So she came back to us and she spent, we just finished up another one, but many of our clinical doctoral students have completed research in this area demonstrating the evidence. And it is so exciting to see all of those different groups of people connect, because now she has a thriving business with an incredibly well-established evidence-based handwriting program that's doing very, very well. And that was because we had that connection between all those different entities. So as a clinician, think about that way too. Funding or financial resources, this is one we always struggle with. You can do a lot with a little. I'm always the person that will come in and in all honesty, we go for these huge research grants, right? So we end up having a lot of money at sometimes and no money at other times. I can do a lot with a little. You can get a lot done with a little bit of money. And from a clinical perspective, we know how to do that. When you get into the clinic, we're very resourceful. We make things. We figure out how we can get funding for things. And there are little bits of funding out there too. One good example of this is in the school system. If you're interested in working in the school systems, they have these little $5,000 to $10,000 grants to implement programs within that school district. You might go to the person that you're working for and say, I really want to do this. I think this could be helpful for our facility. And they might give you a couple $1,000s to do that. So that goes back to don't be afraid to ask. Research expertise. We've talked about this already, that connecting with somebody that knows research and that you can help, or they can help you. So making those connections. And don't be afraid to connect with people that aren't right next to you or in your neighborhood. I want to give you an example of this. A PhD student in Arizona. She was an old student of mine, a master's degree student of mine years and years ago, and I met up with her at a conference one year. And she came up to me and said, Beth, I'm in my PhD program now. I'm really interested in the work you're doing. Is there any way that we can connect? So she's in Arizona. She has her own private practice. And we have completed now 2 to 3 research studies together. And it has been a great relationship. And out of that, she now has 2 to 3 publications that she wouldn't have had before. And she's in Arizona. So you can make it work. It works. We have so much technology now that isn't a barrier. So even if you can't find somebody locally, reach out to those other folks in different areas of the country. So the last thing I'm going to mention is just access to literature and libraries. You probably wouldn't have even thought of this now because you probably are in your university databases all the time, right? You're always in that library database. When you graduate, it is one of the issues that you may run into as a clinician. Some places that you work may have access to some of that data, some of the research, some of the literature. but oftentimes you don't have that. So what I'm going to suggest is that before you walk out the door of your university, before you graduate, go to your alumni association and say, hey, so what are the benefits of being an alumni here? And one of them oftentimes is that you can have access to library access. That can vary amongst universities, amongst colleges, but for example, at our university, the alumni are allowed to have access to come to our library, but not virtually. And the reason being is that they can only buy so many licenses, and that just is how it works. But students still can come back and use the library anytime they want. So ask that question before you leave. And advocate for research. Talk with your employers about your interest and how it can help the place that you work. This can be done before you even get hired. You are in demand. Let me just tell you that right now. Clinically, when you get out, I want to tell you the good news. There are people that want to hire you. They are waiting for you to graduate. Ask the question, what do you feel about research? Do you think it's important? Do you ever implement research in this clinical practice? Ask those questions in your interview if you're really interested in generating research in that setting. Explore the benefits beforehand, though. Be ready to present the benefits. So let's say you are hired and you want to implement and generate a research study. Be ready to tell them, hey, these are the benefits. You know, we'll get reimbursed better. We'll be able to maybe implement a service that somebody else hasn't been able to implement. We'll be prepared when all of these changes come down about funding. They're already starting. Just so you know, there's a lot of funding mechanisms that dictate that what we do has to be evidence-based. That's the school system too, by the way. IDEIA and No Child Left Behind both have statements about evidence in our interventions. So, and that's a big area. Also insurance companies now too. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Ask for what you need too, but make it reasonable and feasible within your setting. Obviously, if you're coming in and saying, I need this much money and I need these resources, and you're looking at a financially strapped place, you know, they're not going to have those. But don't be afraid to ask for what's reasonable and feasible. This last slide, get started on your journey. I do want to tell you, you just have to start someplace and go. You're going to, over time, build a collaborative network of people that you work with, a support system, a mentorship system, but it takes time. So you just have to say, I'm going to start this journey, I'm going to make it work for me, and I'm going to make it happen. I wanted to share a slide. I did a presentation at our OT Research Summit with talking about collaborations in research. And I'm going to go back to that statement, don't be afraid to ask. Because this network, these are all people, it's really hard to see. These are some research projects that I have going on. But there's a whole lot of people here. The people in red are my primary mentors. Some of the other folks are my collaborators that I met over time in some of these research projects. But I had to start with one person and build these networks and build this research agenda. So just take the first step and don't be afraid to ask. And I wish you well as you head out on that journey. Thank you.
Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me? Yeah? All right. Great. So thank you, Beth. Again, my name is Melissa Suspect. I'm really, really excited to be here. I really love working with passionate, driven students such as yourself. I'm also very passionate about evidence-based practice. So having the opportunity to fuse the two in this presentation is really cool for me. So just some background about myself. I went a semi-different route in the OT world after graduation. So I'm not currently a clinician. Like Joe mentioned, I started off as a fieldwork student at AOTA in summer of 2013, and then came on as a full-time employee. So I mostly work on student and new practitioner leadership and engagement initiatives. So I'm the staff liaison to the Assembly of Student Delegates. I also work really closely with AOTA's Chief Operating Officer, So I'm involved in projects such as the recent workforce study that just came out. And then also I'm a contributor to the Evidence-Based Practice Project and a member of AOTA's evidence team. So most of my focus with EBP is really, and I'm going to use EBP throughout the presentation, so just so you know that's evidence-based practice. My focus is really on the knowledge translation of the resources that we have. So AOTA comes out with a lot of really important, really useful resources, but they often don't make it into practitioners' hands. So that's why I'm here today. Okay, so one of the ways that we try to spread the word about evidence-based practice is through social media, specifically Twitter. So how many of you here are on Twitter? Anyone? Okay, well, for those few of you, this is a phone-friendly presentation, so feel free to tweet OT Evidence and AOTA Conclave throughout the presentation and throughout Conclave. And when you're using one of the many resources that I'm going to talk about, because I know you're going to use them all, feel free to tweet OT Evidence, or if you're really excited about the research that you're reading, try to spread the word. We're trying to make EBP more approachable, more digestible, and we think that social media can help us with that. So follow myself and follow Deborah Lieberman, who is the Director of Evidence-Based Practice. So you've heard a lot about EBP. I'm not going to knock you over the head again with another definition, but I do want to focus on one important point here, that EBP is not just research, but the critical appraisal of research. So that's the process of carefully and systematically examining research to judge its trustworthiness and its value and relevance. And very, very importantly, applying it in a way that meets your client's preferences, their beliefs, and values. So it's really about understanding a collective body of evidence, critically looking at it, and then putting it into practice with a client-centered approach. Okay, so what is EBP at AOTA? AOTA has done a lot of work for you as far as synthesizing and critically appraising the research that is out there. So outlined here is a very rigorous systematic review process, which really produces one of the highest levels of evidence that's out there in the field. And I'm not just saying that because I work there. So first things first, AOTA staff and content experts such as Beth, who is currently working on a systematic review, they start with topics that are really important to OT. So could be home mods, traumatic brain injury, mental health, the list goes on. And then they come up with relevant clinical questions in that area that need to be answered. So, for example, what is the effectiveness of OT to improve social skills in a person with autism spectrum disorder? So they then gather all the applicable peer-reviewed articles on that topic that are selected, and that includes articles within OT and outside the OT profession. And there's very specific inclusion criteria that's applied. So only articles with level 1, level 2, and level 3 evidence that are within a certain time period. They're then synthesized, abstracted, and critically appraised for the strength of evidence. And then that's when our content experts come in to help make judgments and formulate recommendations based on the strength of the evidence that's gathered. All of that is published in a few different resources, and I will go into depth about that later on, what resources that we have. The last step is what we really, really need your help with, is actually putting this into practice. So why do we go through this really rigorous process? Joe covered it very well as Beth, but of course, first and foremost, it promotes client-centered care, which is what we're all about. It guides their clinical decision-making. It's going to allow our clients to have those better outcomes. Of course, it is cost-effective, which, as you know, in our current healthcare climate, is more important than ever. It really builds our confidence with clients, families, and caregivers. So if you have a client that's kind of nervous about services, and you let them know, listen, this is based on the evidence that's collected, they're going to feel a sense of reassurance They expect and deserve to hear that what they're doing is based on the best evidence that's out there. And of course, EBP helps to recognize the value of OT interventions with external audiences, regulatory agencies, third-party payers, and referral sources, institution-based program managers. So it's going to help you get reimbursed, and it's also going to help ensure that these referrals are going to continue to come to you. And of course, it helps us to make sure students and practitioners have the ability to stay up to date and current with the research. So we really need your help, not only to practice based on EBP, but to shepherd that information into your workplace. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you all can become an EBP agent of change. So first things first, you really need to get a good handle about what resources are out there. And we found that a lot of practitioners aren't necessarily resistant to practice EBP, but it might be that they don't know where to start. They don't know what information will be useful, and they don't know how to access it. So I recommend you all, if you haven't already, to visit AOTA's website, take a look at the evidence-based practice section, really familiarize yourself with what's out there, and then share that with others. Share that with other practitioners. Share that with your colleagues on an ongoing basis. So I will go over some of our resources. First, we have our critically appraised topic series, and they're an at-a-glance synthesis of the systematic reviews that I discussed. And over the last year, we've been developing what we call mini cats, which aren't little kittens, but it sounds like that. And they are they're brief and more digestible than the older versions. So typically they're 2 to 3 pages, and they really get down to the clinical bottom line, recommendations for clinicians in practice. So this is something that as a student, I didn't even know that it existed. And it's super, super helpful. So please check it out if you haven't already. And then 2 to 3 times a year, EBP will host a special issue of AJOT that features these systematic reviews. So again, they're really useful, peer-reviewed articles because it provides a synthesis of a group of articles and not just one scientific study. So keep in mind, these CATs and the special issues of AJOT are free and accessible if you're a member. And one new resource that we have is called Evidence Connections, and it was featured in the September-October issue of AJOT. And that features a case study that integrates EBP findings. So I think that's a very interesting way to digest evidence is through this kind of storytelling. So check that out, and we'll be coming up with more of those in the future. Lastly, we have our practice guidelines, and they're based off of the systematic reviews as well. And they really offer everything you need to know about the topic area. They have the domain and process of OT, best practices for interventions. There's a lot of helpful information. There's also case studies, evidence tables, and really relevant medical codes. So if you're looking to build your library as a new practitioner, I highly suggest you think about purchasing a practice guideline for your library. Okay, so you understand what's out there. What's next? So you might enter your workplace and feel really anxious and excited to make changes to promote evidence-based practice right off the bat. Or maybe you're just really nervous and looking to stay afloat, like me on fieldwork. But regardless of what your mindset is, you really need to take it one step at a time. So if you want to be an EBP agent of change, you first need to gain a really strong understanding of your workplace policies and procedures. Understand how things are run, understand how evidence-based practice might already be used, and very importantly, establish yourself professionally. So figure out how you're going to manage your time to stay on top of your documentation, get to know your colleagues, and really try to gain their respect. So that when you do approach your supervisor or management, you'll already have proved to them that your opinion should be respected and that you can handle the day-to-day responsibilities. So whatever ideas that you would like to propose, they're more likely to have to give you the support that you need to follow through with them. So another way to promote EBP is really just through your own example. So if you're on field work, and say your supervisor is practicing an intervention that's somewhat outdated, or maybe it's not occupation-based, instead of going to them and saying, listen, this is wrong, the evidence doesn't support it, you could say something along the lines of, well, you know, I've been reading about this intervention, you know, it's really well supported by the evidence, it seems like it could work really well for this client, it really fits with their profile, can I give it a try and practice this intervention? So that way it shows that you've done your research, you're being a little less attacking, and you're really showing your supervisor through your own example, which is really important. And likewise, this is something that can catch on with your colleagues. So when they see you researching on your downtime, when they see you implementing evidence in your services, when they see you demonstrating optimal client outcomes, it's going to be contagious. So a couple of just quick tips as far as practicing EBP in your everyday life as a practitioner. Of course, document pre and post-test data to objectively track your patient's progress and outcomes, which is really going to be important to reflect on about, you know, checking what is working, what's not working, what can you improve. You need to be constantly questioning your interventions and how successful they are and what the outcomes are. So have a purpose behind every treatment strategy. Don't just go through the motions. How is what you're doing with your client right now going to specifically impact future functioning? And as I mentioned, it's not just about the research and the literature. It's about the client's perspective and having a client-centered approach. So EBP means that your client comes first. And also, of course, be sure to make sure all the assessment tools you're using are standardized. Okay, so having a community of people to talk about EBP with is really, really important. It's going to help shape the culture of your workplace. So learning EBP with your coworkers creates a forum for you to bounce off ideas. It generates excitement. It really helps everyone stay up to date and offer the best possible care for your clients. So if your setting doesn't offer you an opportunity for regular meetings with your colleagues about evidence, look into scheduling a time on a regular basis for these discussions. And I think it's so important to have on a regular basis because we know how crazy and hectic work schedules can be. And unless you have a time set aside, it can slip through the cracks. So if you're interested in setting something up, just a few quick tips about approaching your supervisor or management. Of course, follow the chain of command. Maintain a collaborative mindset. Be very organized in your approach. So make sure you're gathering all the materials that you need to show the effectiveness of whatever you're trying to implement. Show the value for your workplace. Show how it's going to make a difference. Show why it's important. But keep things very simple and be ready to have a well-versed conversation regarding your ideas and suggestions. So one format for sharing evidence with your colleagues is through a journal club, which Joe has already mentioned. So it's a group that meets regularly to critically evaluate recent articles in the literature. So ASCI is a really helpful tool for starting a journal club. Has anyone heard of the Journal Club Toolkit? Raise your hand. Great, we have 3. All right, well, good opportunity for you guys to go and check it out. So it's super helpful to make sure you don't need to reinvent the wheel. It has a step-by-step guide for how to run your club. Everything from planning guide to flyers, a statistics reference sheet. For those of you who aren't as, you might have seasoned or practitioners that maybe they're not as familiar or comfortable with statistics, that can be super helpful. And a critical appraisal guide, and lots of other really useful resources. So just some important tips. Of course, start small. Don't completely overwhelm yourself. Maybe you invite a couple colleagues or a few colleagues that you really trust for your first session and then get their feedback and then grow your club from there. Here are some other considerations. You want to think about your format. So what types of articles are you going to discuss during your sessions? Think about scheduling, which, as we know, can be a major barrier. So maybe it's something where you can piggyback with already existing in-services, or maybe you hold it through lunch and have people volunteer and rotate to bring a tasty snack, which is a very important incentive. Think about your space, food, again, publicity. So are you going to advertise it via email? Are you going to post flyers? And there's flyers in the kit. Who are you going to include in your session? Is it just going to be OT? Or is this something you really want to promote with other allied health professions that you work with? Also, you can consider the possibility of documenting contact hours depending on your state's regulations. And there's lots of information about that in the kit. So this is a resource that I haven't mentioned yet called AOTA's Evidence Exchange. Has anyone here participated in the Evidence Exchange? Yes. All right, great. So AOTA's Evidence Exchange is an opportunity for students and new practitioners to submit critically appraised papers. So they're based on research articles, which are then reviewed, and if accepted, are posted on AOTA's website. So if you're having a journal club, this can be really useful. They're brief, 2 to 3 pages. They explain the strength of the evidence, the clinical bottom line. They take a look at the methodology. So you can take advantage of these papers to help really drive your discussions in your journal club. And then just some other tips. Make sure you prepare some guiding questions to facilitate discussion. And there are sample questions in the toolkit. Of course, incorporate critical appraisal. So really think about and discuss the validity of the results, the relevance of the study to your setting, the implications for your setting. How does this relate to your current clients? Do you need to make changes to your current practices based on the research that you guys are discussing? And this is really important to make sure that you're following up with everyone that attends. So make sure these lessons learned are actually being used in practice. So that might mean following up with everyone at the next session, or maybe you want to create goals to achieve based on the results of your session. So just some other ideas for EVP presentation discussions with your colleagues. You could also go over an evidence-based case study based on a client that you collectively work with other clinicians. It could be just a summary of evidence to support what you're currently doing in your practice setting, or evidence that could be better utilized in that setting. You could also cover updates on the process and or requirements of documentation or standardized assessments. And we know you all will be collecting pre and post-test evidence data, so you can bring this to a session and really discuss the implications for your setting. Okay, so we've talked about accessing the resources, sharing the resources. Now I'm going to talk briefly about contributing to our base of knowledge on EVP. So you can build your own EVP body of knowledge at your workplace, and that could mean gathering all the systematic reviews that really apply to your setting and your client population, and taking out what is important to be applied at your setting, and maybe making that available to others. And if you decide to do this and share with your colleagues, you of course need to approach your supervisor first. Of course, explore clinical research questions in the workplace. So start to answer their own questions yourself, and start research. Of course, you can attend or present professional conferences. Chicago is coming up soon. I hope you all are considering attending. My little plug. Also, you can review and contribute to the research opportunities table. So the research opportunities tables is a relatively new AOTA resource, and that's also based on the systematic reviews. So they indicate where research on interventions is really strong, and also where research is moderate, weak, or insufficient, and therefore future research is needed. So if you're looking for a research topic, this is a really good place to start. And what's nice about the tables is you can also enter your information if you're interested on collaborating on a research topic, if you're interested in sharing your past research, or if your setting is interested in sharing some clinical data. So if you haven't already, please check out those tables. And then also you can participate in the evidence exchange as students, working with faculty members, and then also as clinicians. So what is involved in that is basically you'll come up with an at-a-glance summary of the findings and methods of individual articles. And then it's submitted, and we have reviewers that take a look at it. And a lot of times they'll come back with suggestions for edits. And through that process, if it's accepted, that's posted on AOTA's website. So it's really useful for building your critical appraisal skills, but also for contributing to AOTA's body of knowledge on evidence-based practice. So please take advantage of that. And it sounds a little intimidating, but it's actually a pretty approachable process. They have critical appraisal guidelines and tips and everything you need to help you throughout the process. And also, so once you become clinicians, after a year of practicing, you can also serve as a reviewer for the evidence exchange. So that's another way that you are able to contribute. So any questions about being an EVP agent of change, don't hesitate to contact me. Also, you can contact Deborah Lieberman, the Director of Evidence-Based Practice. And I do have to make one more plug. So through the Assembly of Student Delegates, they create an e-newsletter called the OT Student Pulse. We're always looking for authors and ideas if you're ever interested in contributing. So yeah, that's my shameless plug. I think we're going to be opening it up for questions. And I will be around for all of Conclave. So feel free to approach me at any time if you want to talk about evidence or if you want to talk about student initiatives and engagement. I would be happy to touch base with you guys. Thank you so much.